this RTD committee meeting. In my capacity as chair of the RTD Finance and Planning Committee, I now call to order the Tuesday, November 12th, 2024 meeting of that committee. Let the record reflect that we are convened as of 5:31 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. I would respectfully ask everyone who is attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Please note that the committee meetings of the RTD Board of Directors will be, for the time being, held remotely via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded for future reference. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of these meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the RTD's board website. Now, during today's meeting, we are also providing communication access real-time translation, also known as CART. Anyone who would like to access this service should send an email to the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided to you. Additionally, the CART transcript can be automatically translated into Spanish for anyone who would like access to a live transcript of this meeting in Spanish. Of course, you can also just click on the closed captions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. In addition, a live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. Our intention is to make this meeting and all of our meetings as accessible as possible for all of our constituents. With all that having been said, I would now like to call the roll for the committee members. Director Bob Broom.
Present.
Board First Vice Chair Peggy Catlin.
Here.
Director Bobby Deschel.
Here.
Director Lynn Geisinger.
Here.
Director Joyanne Rusha.
Present.
Committee Vice Chair Michael Guzman.
Here.
And I am Chair Doug Tisdale, and I am present. And so that means that all of the members of the Finance and Planning Committee are present with us. In addition, for the sake of the record, I note that we also have Director Julian Bouquet with us this evening. I do not see any other directors. Am I missing any other directors, Mr. Kroll? Thank you for that.
No, sir.
All right. I would now like to open the public comment session for public comment to be made by anyone who would like to address this committee regarding any topic that is listed in the published meeting agenda for this month or for last month. Now, if you wish to speak and you have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. During this comment period, the committee will not offer any direct comments or responses. If you would like to be contacted regarding your public comment, please email the RTD board office at that same email address I just gave you, which is rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Now, Mr. Board Manager Kroll, are there any hands raised?
Yes, Director Tisdale, this is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. At this time, we have one hand raised, and that is from Richard Bamber.
All right, thank you very much. And please note, ladies and gentlemen, that staff will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. And if you're dialed in on your phone, please press *6 to toggle your mute settings. And please bear in mind that by participating in this process, you are being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, then your comments will need to be submitted to the board office in writing. And the comments can be submitted to that same email address, which is rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Speakers should begin their remarks by stating their names, and each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to speak. We've had identified our first speaker as Richard Bamber. If you would, Mr. Bamber, please state your name for the record, and then you may proceed.
Good evening. It's Richard Bamber, Greater Denver Transit, and thanks for the opportunity, as ever, to speak, Chair Tisdale. I'd like to speak mainly tonight on some of the budget, some of our initial findings. We have sent in, a lengthy letter with a lot of questions, which we'd appreciate response from staff. Always happy to take a call, arrange a meeting, whatever is easiest, basically, for everybody. That said, I wanted to alert the directors to 3 main themes that we've found so far. About a year ago, I stood up at the full board and made references that certain tax returns of mine were longer than the budget book. The good news is the second edition, 1st of November, 91 pages. We're going in a trend where we're seeing more data, more information, and that is to be applauded. We're particularly pleased to see the appendix, where we can see the financial information presented in a similar manner to the monthly financial statements. So thank you. That said, with the expenditures, noting from local government budget law, that's DOLA, that expenditures and revenues generally must be described with explanatory schedules or statements classifying the expenditures by object and the revenues by source. That's in the statute. We look at the way the expenditures are sort of broken down, and yes, you could argue they are by object, but not really by useful object. And an example of this is, say, the rail operations department. We can't see, it's hard to see a breakdown of what's light rail, what is the N line commuter rail, and what is the rail transportation we're simply writing a check to DTO for. Likewise, in the bus operations, you would expect to see amounts going out to 3 or 4 amounts going out to Transdev for their various different service groups for fixed route bus service, the likes of Via Mobility for FlexRide and Accessoride, and then 4 separate things for the Access on Demand service. So what we would make the comment is objectively hard to reconcile a big operations expenditure cost with what the actual bits of RTD and what they're doing. And then lastly, we'd still love to see a proper capital programs book with the budgeted amounts for each current and planned capital project appropriate over the years. Last year, directors were asked at very short notice to approve 152 million line item for the downtown light rail works. We've now completed phase 1 of those works. So you would expect to see the Kirsch contract, which rebuilt the 5 grade crossings, possibly invoiced 90%, 90-something%, and there'll be minus a bit of retainage that will go for an invoice next year. And then you would see that amount being knocked off the 152 total. We don't see any of that. We still see that 152 total. I'd say those are the main things. I'd like to really end on a much lighter note. I'd like to thank Chair Tisdale for his excellent chairmanship of this committee, and thank all directors who have served in the past year for finance and planning. So moved.
Oh, Director Tisdale, you are on mute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll. I appreciate that. You missed my gracious thanks to Mr. Bamber for his, as always, interesting and informative comments. Are there any other speakers who have raised their hand or indicated a desire to speak at this meeting?
Director Tisdale, there are no further speakers in the queue.
All right, thank you very much. And Mr. Executive Manager, were any emailed comments received for today's meeting. I believe Mr. Bamber mentioned one, but please advise of any others.
Yes, Director Tisdale, the only emailed comment that we have received is from Greater Denver Transit that Mr. Bamber referenced in his comments. It contains a number of questions and remarks related to the 2025 budget.
All right, thank you. And we should note for the sake of the record that email comments will be added to the end of the committee transcript once that's ready for public transparency. So with no other participants in the queue and no other emails to be acknowledged, we will now close the public comment period at this time. The next item on our agenda is entitled Information from External Entities. There are no external entity reports that we have to present this evening, so we'll move right on to our next agenda item, which is recommended actions. There are 4 recommended actions on the agenda for this November meeting of the Finance and Planning Committee. The first action is for the Zero Fares on Transit Equity Day 2025. This is a recommended action for the Board of Directors to authorize the General Manager and CEO or her designee to implement zero fares on February 4th, 2025, which is Transit Equity Day, and to further authorize the annual implementation of a zero fare day for each Transit Equity Day thereafter. May I have a motion?
So moved.
All right, I have Director Ruscia
Second.
as the movement, and the second is
Geisinger.
Geisinger. Thank you very much, Board Second Vice Chair Lynn Geisinger. I would like to ask Carl Green Jr., the Director of RTD's Civil Rights Division, and Doug McLeod, our Chief Financial Officer, to present this item. I'll let you gentlemen decide who goes first, but the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Tisdale and members of the committee. Again, Carl Green Jr., Director of the Civil Rights Division. I'll begin and then pause to offer up if Mr. McLeod would like to offer any additional comments. Tonight, I'll be covering down on zero fares for Transit Equity Day. There's no PowerPoint presentation, and the information presented can be referred to board packet pages 3 through 5. Transit Equity Day is a national day of action to commemorate the birthday of Rosa Parks, who was born on February 4th, 1913. By declaring that public transit is a civil right, this would not only highlight Mrs. Parks, who is widely considered the mother of the civil right or the federal or freedom movement and the first lady of the civil rights, but also pay homage to other pioneers, as well as to recognize the present and future legacies of the civil rights and social justice movements, not only in Colorado, but nationally. And just for further context, Transit Equity Day was first celebrated federally by the U.S. Department of Transportation in 2021 and gained wider adoption in 2023 by a number of different public transit agencies in the cities across the nation. The big picture here is the board's policy adoption would promote equity in public transportation and raise awareness about the critical importance of transit to all members of our community. And lastly, I'd like to point out that the financial impact per day is anticipated to be upwards of $265,000 each year. And this figure includes fare revenue replacement using a weekday average calculation, as well as law enforcement and security and marketing expenses. This not only highlights the board's opportunity to promote equity, but as we think about the bigger picture of one RTD to celebrate a civil rights pioneer, Rosa Parks. And with that being said, I'll conclude my remarks and happy to answer any questions, but also offer up for Mr. McLeod if you'd like to provide any additional sentiments.
All right, thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Carl, Mr. Green. Appreciate that. The only thing I would add is to let the committee know that currently RTD offers zero fares on New Year's Eve. So New Year's Eve 2025, that will be a zero fare day. And I believe that the hours are 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. over New Year's Eve. And then the only other zero fare days that are offered on a regular basis will be the general election for the actual general election day every 4th year, plus the national vote early day. So it's really that one day each year, and then every 4th year on general election. So this would just be adding simply one more day.
Thank you very much, Mr. McLeod. At this time, I would like to ask those directors who have questions.
Chair?
I'm sorry. Yes, please.
If I may,
I'm sorry, General Manager.
I just want to clarify a statement that Mr. McLeod made. Actually, zero fares are held biennially because they include midterm elections. That would be a general election, not every 4 years.
Thank you. As he was saying that, I was wondering, and I'm so happy that General Manager, CEO Johnson, you stepped in to correct that so that the record is accurate in that regard. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So now I will ask for those directors who have questions or who would like to make a comment to raise your virtual hand, and I will call on you in turn. For directors or staff who are calling into the meeting on your phone, if you wish to speak, please, as you know, just press *9. I will go first to Director Arusha. You are recognized.
Thank you, sir. So I'm in support of this action item, and I'm very pleased staff brought it forth. Thank you so much. I did have just a question. I noted, excuse me, in the fiscal note that we'd budgeted extra for security. And I was wondering if staff could speak to that, just the reason for the potential extra security need. And also because I don't have the memory of the elephant, if a similar fiscal note was in the previous recommended action for free fare during election days. Thank you. That's my only question.
Thank you very much, Director Arusha. And Mr. Green, would you like to cover that one?
Yes, Director Tisdale, if I may. Great question, Director Arusha. As far as the law enforcement and security, this was also embedded within the general election and the national vote early day. And it was, as I spoke with now one of the co-deputy chairs with Stephen Martingano, looking at the anticipated expenses for security personnel on our services, that was the figure that was provided, and noting that we as we approach 2025 and as we think about the number of personnel that we're increasing, that is actually substantially lower than the previous figure, which is utilizing contracted personnel. So that would just be leveraging TPD sworn officers as far as being able to provide that level of support.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. Appreciate that. And that sounded responsive to your question, Director Arusha. So I think we can move on from there. Mr. Vice Chair, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Again, with the fiscal note, fare revenues per weekday, it will be 1 day. Law enforcement per day, it's a single day. Marketing's being requested annually. Can someone speak to that, please? It's not a whole lot, but I do want to make sure that this is not going to be something that gets us into trouble as we're dealing with budgeting for a single day of the year at 15 grand every single year that we go forward with this. Just a little concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. I see that Stuart Summers, our Director of Marketing and Communications, has also lit up his screen, but I'll go to Mr. Green first, and then Mr. Summers may choose to weigh in on that. Mr. Green.
Yes, Director Tisdale, if I may. So to start off, I just wanted to highlight, as we were having the conversation of bringing forth this to the board for Zero Fares for Transit Equity Day, as guided by GM CEO Johnson, and knowing that it's going to take a concerted effort to really highlight and promote this day as a National Day of Action. So in conversations with Chief Engagement and Communications Officer Stuart Summers, we highlighted that it could be up to $15,000 for the first year. But as we think about this continuously, then it wouldn't be as much, knowing that we would have already the products or the assets to promote this day. And I'll offer up to Stuart Summers if he would like to highlight any additional remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Summers, do you want to append to that?
I would just quickly add that it is up to 15,000. So it's just an amount that we've put in place just in case we need to do any of that marketing or promotion. This would buy things like vehicle wraps, on vehicle advertisements, paid promotions on social media, anything that would relate to the storytelling behind Transit Equity Day. We'd also want to promote the why behind this day and not just the services that would be provided on that day as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. And I know that you also are in touch with the American Public Transportation Association, APTA, and they have many collateral materials for National Transit Equity Day that obviously they would make available to us. Any other discussion on this recommended action? All right, hearing none, I believe at this time we are prepared to go for a vote. Let me ask, are there any no votes on this action? Having paused to allow people the opportunity to unmute if they wanted to say no, and having no one say no, then we have 7 aye votes, all of the committee members, 0 no votes, and 0 abstentions on the motion that was made by Director Ruscia and seconded by Director Geisinger. Therefore, the matter passes. Thank you very much. The second recommended action this evening is for the Centennial State Liquid Investment Pool, the CSLIP participation. And this is a recommended action for the Board of Directors to approve RTD's participation in the Centennial State Liquid Investment Pool, also referred to as CSLIP. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Director Guzman and Vice Chair of the committee, and a second by Director Broom. I would like to ask Doug McLeod, our Chief Financial Officer, and Brendan Morgan, the Senior Manager for Debt and Investments, to present this item. Mr. McLeod, if you would lead us off, please.
Thank you, Chair Tisdale. Just wanted to let the committee know that we will be adding a resolution to this board item. It occurred to us in past practice when we add investment options or investment pools, we have asked the full board to approve a resolution if this committee and the board approves this recommended action. So that will be added tomorrow to the package. And with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Brendan Morgan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Morgan, you are recognized now.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Brendan Morgan, Senior Manager in Debt and Investments. I'm going to talk about this local government investment pool, a little bit about what these pools are, and some recent events relating to these pools. So to start with here, RTD's investment policy prioritizes safety, liquidity, and yield in that order of importance. In order to meet these policy objectives, RTD invests some of its funds in Colorado local government investment pools, or LGIPs, as they're known as short. These investment pools are defined in Title 24 of Colorado Revised Statutes and are available to all Colorado local governments. LGIPs provide a benefit to participating governments in the form of economies of scale, full-time professional portfolio management, diversification, and liquidity. In addition to RTD's fixed income portfolios, RTD currently invests in 3 Colorado LGIPs known as CSAFE, ColoTrust, and CSIP. Investing in more than one pool provides diversification of RTD's investments while also taking advantage of varying investment approaches to ensure the most efficient management of RTD's funds. A new Colorado LGIP named Centennial State Liquid Investment Pool, or CSLIP for short, was established in May of 2024. The primary investment objective of CSLIP is to provide daily liquidity, and cash management. It looks a lot like a money market fund you might invest in at your own bank. CSLIP is rated AAA-M by Standard & Poor's. It has contracted with State Street Global Advisors as its registered investment advisor and Eide Bailly as its auditor. Some of the local governments currently participating in CSLIP include the City of Centennial, Boulder County, Boulder Valley School District, Alamosa County, and City of Cherry Hills Village. Staff is seeking board approval for RTD to become a participant in CSLIP in order to leverage CSLIP's investment approach while also further diversifying RTD's investments, thereby enhancing the safety, liquidity, and yield of RTD's funds. So with all that out of the way, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morgan. We appreciate that. And just to clarify, while the chair has the option to do so, this is not an obligation or a commitment to invest in this CSLIP fund, but rather simply the authorization for RTD to do that should circumstances warrant or appear beneficial in the future. Is that correct, Mr. Morgan?
Yes, Chair, that is correct. The decision whether or not to invest and how much to invest at varying points in time in the future are yet to be made. This is simply, as you said, giving the option for RTD to participate and make the investment in the future.
Thank you, sir. All right, then, Committee Member Deschel, Director Deschel, you are recognized, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for the presentation. I'm just wondering what the rush is to sort of bring it forward without seeing a year of performance and a year of audited statements. Of course, the other government entities who have chosen to participate are great, but I think for me, I'm sort of wondering from the risk standpoint, why we might sort of see how it goes for a year before being in the quote unquote guinea pig phase of any investment fund.
And Mr. Morgan, you may choose to respond to that. I think our colloquy might help inform that response too.
I'd be happy to. Thank you. That's a good question. There's a lot of confidence in the fund simply because of the advisors involved. If you look at State Street, I had an opportunity to meet with their cash team who runs similar local government investment pools in California, and I believe it was Florida as well. So they have years and years of experience operating as investment advisors for these funds. So this is not their first rodeo, so to speak. They also operate money market funds, the same cash management team. So they have experience beyond local government investment pools that are still investing in the same types of securities. Beyond that, the AAA rating from Standard & Poor's gives some confidence that they have done a thorough review. They've looked at the current portfolio and what the investment policy of CSLIP is, and deemed that it's worthy of a AAA-M rating. Doug McLeod and I did some diligence. Doug met with a representative from CSLIP and picked his brain for a while. I reached out to DORA, the state agency that regulates local government investment pools, and spoke with them about what CSLIP has done so far as being in contact with the regulators. It sounds like they're checking all the boxes, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and all is well from a regulatory perspective there. So while I understand your concern, I also think that a reasonable approach to this, if the board were to approve, would not to be go whole hog and make a huge investment in this pool. We would likely approach it in a manner that would sort of reflect your sentiment, where we would tiptoe in and perhaps grow a investment over time if deemed appropriate.
Thank you very much. And again, not to put too fine a point on it, this is not a commitment to invest in this pool, rather the authorization for us, should we determine in the future to do so, to be able to do so. Director Deschel, does that respond to your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much, and appreciate it, and also appreciate the additional note of sort of tiptoeing in, especially with a newer fund.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Are there any other directors who have questions or who wish to speak on this matter? If so, please raise your virtual hand. And I see Chair Davidson. Board Chair Davidson, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Committee Chair, and thank you, Mr. Morgan, for presenting this. I think I know the answer, but I just want to confirm. The documents do reference Colorado statutes, and just in recognizing that there are a variety of different entities that can participate in this, are there any practical concerns long-term that changes in statutes may dictate, our ability to continue to participate on this? It seems on the face of it, we are at this point, but given that we are different than some of the others participating, are there any risks associated with possible statutory changes? I know that's a bit hypothetical, but just looking at the others participating, I'm curious if you've considered that at all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Always good to hypothesize about some of these things. That's why we're here, right? Mr. Morgan, you may join in the hypothetical.
Thank you. I would agree. I suppose that that's certainly a risk that state statutes could be changed at any point in the future. The nice thing is none of these investments, if we were to make one, would be any type of long-term. These are, as I mentioned earlier, they look a lot like money market funds. So if we were to make an investment and there were a statute change that impact our ability or decision to participate and be an investor in these pools, we would be able to liquidate that investment within just a day or two, since these are very liquid investments. The weighted average maturity for these types of funds is typically around 30 to 60 days. So the investments made are very short term in the portfolio, and there's nothing that would give me concern about RTD being stuck in a investment that it was no longer allowed to or wanted to be invested in. The major risk there would be something more like a major credit event in the world bond markets that impacted liquidity of all of these types of funds, where maybe they had to lock down the fund for a couple weeks while those that 30-day weighted average maturity sort of rolled towards maturity, and the bonds matured at par. So I think that might have answered your question.
It does. Thank you for entertaining the hypothetical.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Board Chairman. Appreciate that. Before going back to Director Deschel for a second bite at the apple, are there any other committee members or other directors who have questions at this time? Vice Chair Guzman, you are recognized.
I'll be real quick. I just want to maybe state the obvious. This is how I'm understanding this conversation. Essentially, we're allowing ourselves to be able to diversify the portfolio we have. That's it, right? It's as simple as that, with some safeguards. But
Mr. Morgan, you may feel free to affirm.
Yes, I would agree that that is the option that we are requesting, to have this as an option to enhance diversification. Yes. Thank you very much.
All right, and not seeing anybody else, I'll go back to Director Deschel at this point. Sir, you are recognized.
Thank you, and I don't need an answer on this one in this moment, but I just did want to raise that from time to time, we as an agency take a position that we are in fact a local government, and sometimes we take the position we are not a local government based on what we do or don't need to comply with for different state statutes. As I see it, most of those participating now are local governments, and I'm wondering what impact, if any, sort of these types of decisions could portray for someone who wanted to challenge RTD's position when we say we are local, we're not local, and how that might all play out. More of a legal question than an investment risk question.
And it's always good to have attorneys on the board and on the committees, because if anyone can slice and dice these fine points, we as lawyers love to do that. I would suggest that we accept Director Deschel's invitation to defer an immediate gut response to that, if nothing else, so that we can avoid further involvement in the question of, do we say that we're a local government or do we say that we're not? I submit we are, but nonetheless, I want to just give that preface. That all having been said, Mr. Morgan, do you want to comment?
Thank you, Chair. I think your gut response is wise, and I think we will consider that question.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Any other comments or questions from any committee member or any other director relative to the resolution concerning the C-SLIP? All right, seeing none, I will ask at this time, are there any no votes on this action?
Director Tisdale, I'll be a no.
Thank you very much. Director Deschel is indicated as a no. Are there any other no votes? All right, then, with 6 and 1 no vote and no abstentions, that motion passes by a vote of 6-1. The no vote was Director Deschel. The third recommended action for this evening's meeting is the big show, the reason we exist, the 2025 proposed budget. Our third recommended action is for the Board of Directors to adopt resolution number blank, series of 2024, for the adoption of the 2025 budget, and resolution number blank, series of 2024, for the 2025 budget appropriation, and resolution number blank, series of 2024, for the appropriation of 2025 previously appropriated capital. May I have a motion, please?
So moved, Guzman.
And a second?
Second.
And that was okay. So I have Vice Chair Guzman as the movant and Director Broom as the second on the budget resolutions. I would like to ask Doug McLeod, RTD's Chief Financial Officer, and Todd Nickel, the Senior Manager for Budget, to present this item. Mr. McLeod, if you would lead off, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am sharing my screen. Throughout this presentation, I would just like to note that within the packet, the board packet, excuse me, on beginning on page 21, we have a board report followed by the resolution that Chair Tisdale referred to. Also is this presentation within the board packet, but also the budget, the 2025 proposed budget book, as well as changes as an attachment to that. There are also the changes that have been made since the October 8th presentation to this committee, and I will refer to those documents, the budget book and the changes that have been made, on a little bit more of a summary level throughout this presentation. So topics for discussion this evening is talk a little bit about the background, go through the appropriation recommendation for this recommended action, discuss some of the financial information in this final proposed budget, and then talk about next steps. So regarding background, staff did present the 2025 proposed draft budget to this committee on October 8th at the Finance and Planning Committee. It was made available for public inspection prior to the October 15th required statutory deadline, both on the RTD website, printed version in the board office, and also notification was made in the Boulder Daily Camera and the Denver Post, as is required to widely circulated public publications. This recommended action is seeking approval from the committee this evening. If the committee chooses to approve the budget, it would move forward as a recommended action to the full board on December 3rd. I'd also like to quickly mention too, there was a press release that went out today. You may have seen that regarding the 2025 proposed budget, some information that went out to the public. So a lot of public notification regarding this proposed recommended budget. So what you'll see in the resolution for this recommended action is an appropriation totaling $2.8 billion. So I would like to point out that each of these slides where numbers are shown, they're in thousands. So the last three digits are dropped off. So beginning at the top, operating expenses, excluding depreciation, the appropriation request is $1,233,611,000. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on what makes up some of those amounts in a few slides here. Debt, interest, and principal payments not changed since the October 8th presentation. New capital expenditures, there were some small additions there that I'll speak to, and also previously approved capital. Each of these is also available in more detail in the budget book. Then, although we don't necessarily appropriate the fund balances, we include these because an appropriation gives authority for staff to spend the funding. However, I would like to point out that each of these, starting with the Fast Track's internal savings account, capital replacement fund, operating reserve, and unrestricted fund, are all limited to board-specific approval if any of those funds were to be used. These numbers here are just a projection based on the other cash flows from the other expenditure appropriations that we project will be the balances at the end of 2025. Financial information. So much of this financial information has been taken out of the budget book. So while the board does not appropriate revenue, this is the estimate of revenues. And so beginning with fares, what you'll notice is that fares still continue to make up only 4% of RTD's revenue, so a relatively small percentage. Sales and use taxes, this number comes from the September 2024 sales and use taxes forecast from the University of Colorado Leeds School of Business. What I'd point out with this is it's obviously still our largest single source of income here at RTD. It indicates that 67% of the revenues will come from sales and use taxes. But I think one important point to note here is in the green section, grants and other income, $347 million. That number includes the grant revenue that's going to be passed through related to the Colfax BRT, Bus Rapid Transit, of approximately $150 million. So that distorts the pie chart a little bit. So that's just a pass-through grant. Expenditures are included in the expenditure appropriation, and then the $150 million to offset it is included in the grants. Net cost to RTD is zero, but it distorts a little bit the pie chart. In fact, sales and use tax is really closer to 75% of RTD's revenues if we took out that one-time grant pass-through. And then just a small amount on other revenue, $4,400,000. That's mainly investment income. RTD currently has approximately $1 billion in invested assets, and that's the estimate of the yield that will come from those investments over the next year. Moving on to the operating expenditures and capital expenditures that were summarized in the appropriation that's also in the resolution. This provides a little bit more detail, which is also in the budget book. And I will hit on some of the highlights. What we're doing here is comparing what was budgeted for this current fiscal year in 2024 versus the proposed budget for 2025. So beginning with salaries and benefits, what that indicates in that row is that the budget for 2025 will be $52.5 million higher than 2024. The main contributors to that are, as we add staffing to get up to our staffing plan for the system optimization plan, comprehensive operational analysis, as well as additional police officers. And then there's a smaller component in there for inflation and wage increases year over year. Incidentally, the current collective bargaining agreement is currently under negotiations. And so there's a provision in there for some inflationary increases as well. Moving down to the next larger item, outside services. So why this number is so large in both years is this is where we've included the additional Colfax BRT costs. That's not a capital item because it does not belong to RTD. That's where the pass-through. The other side of the revenue is there's $150 million additional in outside services. It's shown both in 2024, because you might remember that the board already approved that in 2024. However, barely any of that money has been expended so far. So we are actually carrying that forward into 2025 to reappropriate it. So of the $388 million in that line item in 2025, approximately $150 million of that amount is related to the Colfax BRT pass-through. Outside services is not a real good description of what's included in that line item, but outside services are any contracted services that RTD does not do in-house. So for instance, the contracted security services, certain IT services, certain legal expenses are embedded in that cost. Really where RTD does not necessarily have the expertise, nor should it hire a full-time person for one-time projects. Those types of things are included within that fairly large number. Moving down to the purchase transportation line. So this one is also a little bit of a misnomer. So purchase transportation really refers to any services that RTD purchases from third parties to provide operational services. So bus, rail, paratransit, all of those costs are embedded within purchase transportation. And towards the back of the budget book, there are departmental breakdowns. So if you were to look at the rail operations page, there's a purchase transportation line in there. That purchase transportation line is for Denver Transit operators based on the contractual arrangement, the concessionaire agreement to provide the A, B, and G line services for commuter rail. So purchase transportation is really where RTD is going outside to utilize the services of third parties to provide operational services. RTD still owns all the assets and the underlying infrastructure in those cases. For the most part, there are certain small exceptions where a facility is owned by one of the fixed route bus operators. However, those costs are really related to the staffing and services provided by those third parties. So a fairly large number there as well. And then finally, I'll move down to the new capital and capital carry forward expenditures in the last two light gray lines there. So what you can see is in 2024, $185 million was appropriated for new capital. $232 million was appropriated for capital carry forwards. And just as a reminder, capital carry forwards are capital projects that are funded by the board through the appropriation. They are not completed by the end of the current fiscal year. So the capital carry forward appropriation request is to continue to use those funds for the same purpose as they were originally intended, but to ask the board to approve the funding to be brought forward. That funding has already been designated in the prior year and set aside. So that funding would also, it's all basically on the balance sheet. So it's already funded. Why you see the switch between new capital and capital carry forwards between fiscal year 2024 and 2025 is due to the $150 million of Colfax BRT. So in 2024, $150 million was included in the $185 million number for new capital. That is now included in capital carry forward in 2025 because it has not all been expended. So we're carrying it forward, requesting that it be carried forward into 2025, and it moves down to the next line. So overall, when you compare budget year over budget year, the total capital expenditure request is decreasing by $57 million, largely due to completion of certain projects. Just wanted to spend a little time on this slide going through what has changed since October 8th, the draft budget presentation for 2025 proposed budget versus what this current and final request is for an appropriation. So you can see there at the bottom, the total change in appropriation between the two dates is $235,345,000. Just to hit on some of the highlighted or the larger items, some of these things occur after the draft budget is presented for public inspection. So for instance, the fuel lock, RTD locked diesel fuel prices at an average of $2.52 per gallon. The initial estimate was much higher than that. That saved $4.767 million in fuel costs. So that was a positive to the budget. Moving down to the concessionaire agreement, $2 million of budgeted funds were removed from the concessionaire agreement. And the concessionaire agreement is the agreement with Denver Transit Partners to provide AB&G commuter rail services. That concessionaire agreement consists of two annual portions of a payment that are paid monthly. One being the fixed amount, which is essentially paying Denver Transit Partners back for the principal and interest they borrowed to build the those three lines, the Eagle P3 project plus commuter rail maintenance facility. So that was part of the overall financing agreement, the design, build, finance, operate, and maintain concessionaire agreement. The finance portion of that is the fixed payment. That is fixed each year based on a schedule. It's got a fixed rate of interest. It goes through 2044. And that's a portion of the payment that's made on a monthly basis. So Denver Transit Partners can pay the bonds that they use to borrow to build the service. The other portion of the concessionaire payment that you see in purchase transportation on the rail department schedule is the actual service payment to provide operational services on a daily basis on those commuter rail lines. I would note that that one is not a fixed payment. That one increases each year based on very specific inflationary factors. There's a labor factor, there's a materials factor, et cetera, that are calculated based on published inflation rates. So that can fluctuate each year. Well, it will go up each year with inflation. Plus, if there's any adjustments to service provision, those are also contemplated in that expense. So throughout the year, at any point in time, RTD may approach Denver Transit Partners and say, hey, we'd like to get some additional cleaning services, or we'd like to add a little bit more service in this area. Those are all negotiated and added to the monthly cost when those services are put in place. Moving down to light rail operators, between October 8th and now, what we realized is that we think that in order to meet the system optimization plan, it warrants having an additional 15 positions hired. That's another $1,195,000. Parking garage preventive maintenance program. This was a preventive maintenance program that existed a couple of years ago and was an ongoing basis to maintain parking garages. As the usage of those garages dropped off during COVID, that program was decreased to a certain extent. And what we're asking is just to reinstitute that at an estimated cost of approximately $2.1 million annually. And then finally, on the bottom line, that large number, and I would point out that all the other items I skipped over are mainly full-time equivalent positions. And what we had done between October 8th and now is there were one or two positions that we realized had not been budgeted, such as the apprenticeship program manager that was added in. There were other positions that we realized the way that we budget for things is not that all the positions get hired on January 1, but they're programmed throughout the year based on throughput of recruiting, as well as when those positions will actually be needed. So that's where some of those adjustments are really coming into play here. Finally, the expense carry forward line item, $237,259,000. So I discussed capital carry forward. We also have expense carry forward. So the difference between capital and expense, capital is related to an asset. So if we're buying a new asset, that would be a capital asset that we recognize, a vehicle, for instance, recognized on our balance sheet, recorded as a vehicle asset, and then depreciated over time. That's a capital purchase that has a value over more than 1 year for accounting purposes. Expenses, on the other hand, are more limited in time frame in their usage. So it would be salaries, those types of things that are, once they're spent, they're gone. So we have an expense carry forward that affects our operating expenses. In this case, it's 237,259,000. That looks like a really big number to carry forward, but what's embedded in that number is $145 million of rail reconstruction funding. So you may remember the board had approved during the last budget approval at the end of 2023, $152 million. The amount that has not been billed at this point is $145 million. So we're asking to carry that expense into next year. Again, it's replacing track and repairing track, reconstructing light rail track. So it's recognized as an expense as opposed to an asset that'll get depreciated over time since we're just repairing and replacing. So to summarize what's been changed in the budget book itself, we have this slide, and I say summarize because there's more detailed a listing of each of the budget changes. And I'd like to thank Stuart Summers again and the communications department for all their work in tracking these changes. That is available, the detailed schedule is available on packet page 134 if you'd like to look at each specific page change. But to highlight some of the larger items that have been changed, we added a debt service schedule. There's I believe there's 3 pages that show numerically by year what the debt service RTD is committed to. Again, our debt service is fixed interest and fixed term. So it's very definite, helps with budget certainty. So what you see there, unless we do additional refinancings, that will be what the debt service is. It's broken out between principal and interest as well, and also between base and fast tracks. So a pretty useful schedule, gives an indication of what our commitment is as an agency to pay off our debt. The capital carry forward, we discussed this on October 8th. That number was not included at that point in time because what we do from a staff position is that that proposed budget is developed up through September. Well, there's still 3 months left in the year. So we try to get as close as possible to the end of the year. We have to look at each individual project, where it stands and what's likely to be needed to be carried over to the prior year or the next year, because every day there's expenditures being made on these. So we only want to ask the board to carry over what we project needs to be carried over to complete those projects. That capital carry forward amount was added into the appropriation request. There's also a schedule available within the budget book. It begins on page 55 if you're interested in looking at the details for that. We updated some of the information within the budget book to take it through August. The October 8th budget book, we only had data for things like ridership through July. So it was indicated for a trend comparison basis. It was indicated through July. We got the August numbers and then just updated those numbers through August. We also, on each of the individual departmental budget pages 64 through 74 of the budget book, added a head count by department, and there's a comparison of year-over-year head count 2024 to 2025. So I think that's fairly useful if you're interested in looking at that. There are, throughout the document, there are miscellaneous grammar, photo, and font changes. As we went through and reviewed it again and made some adjustments, we cleaned it up a little bit to make it look more presentable. And then finally, departmental pages enhancements. So those pages in the budget book 64 through 74, there were certain other additions we did in addition to the head count. We made some additional narratives or disclosures regarding the initiatives in certain departments, such as the fuel lock that we know about, the 15 added light rail operators on the rail page are a couple of examples. But also on the bus operations page, we also broke down that department a little bit further. That's our largest single department here at RTD. So we added a breakout of the paratransit costs, as well as a table at the bottom of that page, which is page 65, to show the special services costs year-over-year budget 2024 versus 2025. So hopefully that will be useful as well. As far as cash flows go, so we looked at the operating expenses and capital expenditures previously. This is what it looks like with revenue also included on a single page. So we've got the 2024 budget, 2025 budget, then the change and the percent change year over year. So just going right to the bottom line, what you can see there is the 2025 budget would expend a net $112 million more than what was budgeted in 2024. And then I think what maybe draw attention to viewers of this statement is in the 2025 budget column, all the way at the bottom. What that shows is a net outflow of cash of $471,772,000. What's important to note on this, that seems like a big number. What's important to note is that it includes the capital carry forward that's brought forward of $324 million. That's funded in a prior year with prior funding. So you're looking at budget versus budget, not actual versus 2025 budget. So that's important to keep in mind. So we're bringing some of those appropriations from 2024 column over into 2025 because they've not yet been expended, to the tune of $324 million on the capital carry forward, which includes the Colfax Colfax BRT, I believe it was. The expense carry forward, we went through that. That has an impact. If you take that out, again, the expense carry forward that was included in 2024 that has not been expended is pulled into 2025, already has funding appropriated for it. And then finally, I'd point out that this also includes, there will be some funding from the Fast Tracks and internal savings account of $22 million. That's not reflected here because we're not showing fund balances. We're simply showing the revenue that's coming in. There's $22 million from the FISA that will be used to pay the increase in the 3-year increase that we're scheduled to pay to Denver Transit Partners for the 10-year annual refurbishments. So that's funded from the FISA. So if you take all those items out, this number is really the $471 million. We're really looking at $44 million net negative in terms of cash flow. So very small amount. Again, these are all projected and assumed numbers. And again, next year, we're going to have the same thing with capital carry forward, expense carry forward, money that doesn't get spent. Just as a reminder, with this appropriation, in order for us to contract for any contract, we have to have the appropriation for those dollars up front. So even though we may not be entering a contract until November, say, of next year, we need the board to appropriate the full cost of that contract before we can enter into that contract. So on an annual basis, what you'll see is constantly carrying money forward that was actually paid for in prior years. And then finally, just wanted to touch on next steps. Tonight, we're asking for the committee's approval to approve this 2025 proposed budget. December 3rd would be, assuming it passes committee, we would be requesting that the full board approves the 2025 proposed budget. And then the budget would be in effect on January 1st, 2025. Incidentally, the state requires that if a board is not, or if a budget is not passed by the board and approved by the governing body prior to the beginning of the fiscal year, the agency would revert to only being able to spend 90% of the prior year's appropriation. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes our presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. McLeod. A comprehensive and cogent presentation as always. And the budget book expansion from what we looked at for the 2024 budget is noted and appreciated. And the addendum that sets forth what the changes are from the October 8 presentation to now is extremely helpful. So again, all of that fine work is very much appreciated. Let's go around to the committee members for questions, and we will begin with Director Broom. Director Broom, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I noted that you've hedged the cost of diesel fuel, which is something you've done before in the past to kind of guarantee how much you're going to have to pay. But my question on that is there any loopholes that the supplier can get out? For example, if war broke out in the Middle East and oil went from $60 to $120 a barrel, can they plead something and get out of that?
And Mr. McLeod, if you can, I think we're asking, is there, for example, a force majeure clause in the contracts that they might rely upon? Mr. McLeod, if you would try to go with that first.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Not that I'm aware of. So I can explain the basic construction of these contracts. So the way it works is RTD contracts with a fuel provider. That fuel provider actually purchases the actual financial contracts, the hedge contracts to lock in those prices. It's not RTD. So RTD has a commitment from that vendor to provide a certain number of gallons at a certain price. So that risk is really placed with the fuel provider. They also add in delivery costs. And incidentally, that $2.52 looks a little bit different than what you see at the pump for diesel. That's because there's certain state taxes that federal taxes that are not included in that number. So that's why the $2.52. But not that I'm aware of, but I'm not a legal expert. So I think it was basically market risk. I would liken it to something similar. I worked at a company where we had hedge contracts on interest rates on loans. And then Lehman Brothers was one of the holders of that. And this company I worked for was actually the interest rates were, it was a hedge contract against interest rates rising. Well, interest rates actually lowered. So this company was on the hook to pay the liability. So in this case, that would not be the issue, since the actual contractor holds that financial obligation. So that's the only thing I could kind of liken it to, but I don't believe there's much risk from RTD's standpoint.
Okay, thank you. On the electrical side, you obviously have to buy electricity from Xcel Energy to run the trains and so forth. How is that pricing arrived at? Does the PUC get involved in that?
Mr. McLeod, if you can take a shot at that one.
Thank you. And I might need somebody with more expertise on that end. Essentially, the way we budget for it is based on what we know, based on our current usage, as well as any potential rate increases that have been communicated. And then we add an inflation factor as well. So we try to account for any inflationary amounts. And I see that General Manager Johnson is coming to my rescue here.
And I was about to say, because I know we've been through this process with the PUC, and I think General Manager CEO Johnson is our best voice in this case. So, ma'am, you are recognized.
Thank you very kindly, Chair Tisdale, and thank you, Director Broom, for the question. I believe what I heard Director Broom asking, does the PUC have any oversight relative to us purchasing electricity, and recognizing that the PUC is designated by the Federal Federal Transit Administration is the state safety oversight agency. They do not have auspices relative to whom we purchase electricity from. That basically rests to the agency relative to how we power vehicles, because if in fact we had diesel or something of the like, we would not be entering into any oversight from the SOA in that vein. So long story short, no, we are not conferring with the PUC relative to the purchasing of electricity to power train consists.
If I may, and I don't want to be presumptuous as to Director Broom, but I think the question was more focused on, do we have a different pricing schedule from Xcel Energy? And does the PUC weigh in on what pricing may be accorded to the RTD given the volume of electricity that we purchase? And I think that's where Director Broom was going, Madam General Manager, CEO.
I appreciate that clarification, sir. Thank you very kindly. And Mr. Jensen has come on. I'll have him opine relative to the usage of that. So Mr. Jensen, please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Jensen, you are recognized.
So our agreements are with Xcel Energy, and that's who we deal with. The PUC does have some auspices over Xcel, but we're not involved in that.
Okay. We'll let it go at that. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Director Broom, does that respond to your question now?
It does. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Vice Chair, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McLeod, page 80 or packet page 122 of the budget. I'm looking at the fiscal year 25 budget fund balance in thousands. And about halfway down the first section, I still see the Tabor Reserve listed with a tidy sum for the next few years. Is that a mistake, or is that there intentionally?
And Mr. McLeod, if you would respond to that one, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Director Guzman, is this the page that you're looking at? I believe this is page 80.
Yes.
Great. Let me just blow it up here.
And we're looking at the net position above the Fast Tracks project. And then that one that you just highlighted, there's two different lines that show Tabor Reserve lines.
Gotcha. And thank you for the question. Yes. So this Tabor Reserve, and we should probably rename this because we've been speaking to Tabor Reserve set aside in the fiscal policy to set funding aside for projected refunds. In 2025, you may recall that our projection prior to the election was that the first Tabor refund was projected to occur in 2027 of approximately $2 million and in 2029 at $3 million. That is something different from this Tabor Reserve right here. So under the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, all governments are required to set aside 3% of certain non-federal revenues. So 3% of their non-federal revenues that are to be used for a declared emergency. So if the governor of the state declares an emergency, that funding may be used, such as a flood, tornado, et cetera, to ensure that government services continue to be provided. So that fund is always there due to statutory requirements under Tabor. We don't use it. We can't use it. And if you do use it under a declared emergency, Tabor, it says it must be replenished as soon as possible. It doesn't really define that time frame, but that's what that is. And so both the base system and Fast Tracks each have their own Tabor Reserve based on 3% of non-federal revenues.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Yeah, that's very helpful that you explain that, because I think people, when they hear Tabor Reserve, ordinarily understand what Director Guzman was talking about, which is funds that an entity will voluntarily hold back for purposes of paying a Tabor refund if that is triggered, as opposed to the constitutionally imposed Tabor Reserve under the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, which is you need to hold on to some cash in case there is a horrible emergency. So they really are two different funds, and I think you expressed that well, and that helps. And I see the General Manager, CEO Johnson has some amplification on that. Ma'am, you are recognized.
Thank you. And actually, I want to go back to the question posed by Director Broom relative to the PUC. While this doesn't pertain to the PUC serving as the state safety oversight agency, I did want to qualify that with the entree of battery electric buses into this agency's bus fleet, that the PUC helped regulate the price of electricity since that was a newly established program. So I wanted to offer that up as staff reminded me of that. Thank you.
Thank you for adding that, because I had remembered that and didn't want to say something, because at my age, who knows, I could have made up that memory. But I appreciate your adding that yes, they did give us an accommodation there with Xcel on pricing. All right, then we'll go next to Director Arusha. You are recognized.
Thank you, sir. I wouldn't mind yielding to Director Geisinger first, if that's okay.
You are very gracious, and will happily accomplish that. Director Geisinger, you are recognized.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. McLeod and team, Mr. Nickel and everyone. This is great. I think it's a lot of good information. I really appreciate it. I guess I have an initial question. We got this letter from Greater Denver Transit. Normally we don't respond to public comment, but this is a situation where we're required to publish it publicly. Do we then go back and meet with them and respond to their questions?
Thank you very much, Director Geisinger, Madam Second Vice Chair of the board. Mr. McLeod, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Sure, thank you. Yes, and we can respond to each one of those and provide the board as well a response to those questions that were posed, so we will endeavor to do that in the next couple of days. Obviously, you need to go over it with General Manager Johnson, provide that response through her. But yes, each of those questions are good questions, and we do have good responses that we can provide to each one.
Great, thank you. And one of them I wanted to ask, where are the head count and budget figures for the Service Planning and Development Division? Can you help with that one?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. I was looking in the budget book myself to see if I could find it quickly, but in any event, Mr. McLeod, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you. Yes, and those would be embedded in the bus operations. So service planning and development are part of bus operations on page 65. So it's not separately broken out. If you would like to see that, Director Geisinger, we can provide that breakout, a more detailed breakout. We chose to do it by department for this budget book for simplicity and understanding sake.
No, that's okay. I saw that one and I thought, oh, that's a good question. They have some other good questions. On page 65, it says bus op, and I don't have it right in front of me, but bus ops is increasing fixed route bus service by 10% over the course of 2025. That's great. I think we're all happy to see service increasing. How did we get that number?
Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and that was through working with Assistant General Manager Fred Worthen in projecting out. So we've got in 2024, we've got a certain number of headcount to provide certain number of revenue hours, and working with bus operations and service development. Based on the headcount, we believe that we can recruit. So the way we budgeted for it was the additional headcount and then the associated operating costs with that 10%. Regarding the 10% specifically, I might need to get back to you on that, Director Geisinger, not having been involved in all the details, if that's okay.
That's fine. I see Ms. Johnson raising her hand.
I was just going to say, I think we might have another quarter to hear from here. So, Madam General Manager, CEO, please.
Yes, thank you very much. And I know Assistant General Manager Worthen is on the call. So for all intents and purposes, as we look at where we are with the reinstatement of service delivery relative to the RTD agency branded comprehensive operational analysis known as the system optimization plan, the determination was made relative to what it is that we need. And as we go forward with additional headcount, it's also the level of trainers that we need in reference to ensure that we could provide service delivery as well as street supervision. Mr. Worthen, if you'd like to expound on what I've outlined, please feel free to do so.
Mr. Worthen, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Director. Fred Worthen, AGM Bus Operations. Yes, this year we're taking a little different approach to our service planning. We are actually planning 18 months in advance. We have projected what our recruitment efforts will look like and what we believe will happen with our retention efforts. And we were very aggressive. We are adding approximately 100,000 revenue hours of service next year. It will be primarily in the bus realm. And that will bring us to about 85% of the system optimization projections that we have set forth in the plan itself.
Thank you. And Madam Second Vice Chair, is that responsive to your question?
Very responsive, but and I'd like to that's great. So if we add 10%, we'll be at 85% of our SOP. And so we're budgeting for that number. And is that based on the current hiring that we have, or that's hoping for additional hiring? Where are we on all of that?
If I may, sir.
Let's go back to Mr. Worthen for a response.
Yes, it is based upon not only our existing hiring trends, but also our attrition trends as well, and what we believe we can support. We also have models too where we know that there is a little bit of variation. So even if we don't hit our exact targeted head count, we do know that we can still continue to support a run board or service change with a small shortage, not a huge shortage, through overtime and through volunteers itself. So based upon the projections that we have and working with Human Resources and the Service Planning Department and Rail, we feel comfortable that we will be able to meet those projections. And we do have a plan laid out for each one of our service changes this year. So we have actually laid out a recruitment plan to align with the service hours we plan on putting in place to make sure that we have hiring ahead of schedule and we're not chasing our tails like we have in the past.
Thank you so much. That answers my questions.
A colorful image to keep in mind. Yes. So I appreciate that, Mr. Worthen. Thank you, sir. And Director Ruscia, Director Broom is up for a second bite at the apple. You haven't had your first. Would you like to defer to him, or do you want to proceed now?
If I could, I'll go ahead and proceed.
Please do.
Thank you. It's always good to let Director Geisinger go before me because she has better questions, and she teed it off for me. I was actually going to ask about the expansion of bus service. So my question was going to be, is that coming from TransDev or internal? And it sounds like from what I just heard, it's internal. And so the first on that is, I guess the question is, what's the breakdown? I'm ready to go to bed in represented versus non-represented. Is that something that staff can just follow up in a memo for us so we get, I think, a better understanding, especially from the operations perspective? And I'm asking, just for context, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I'm looking at our attrition and hiring data that we've gotten recently, and it's not where we want to be relative to frontline operators. And so I think just getting a little bit more info, maybe again, a follow-up memo, could close the loop for a few of us who've asked or are looking at this. So that would just be a request of staff, unless it's something you want to directly address. I don't want operations to bleed over into finance, lest our chair mutes my mic. And then if I could, Mr. Chair, I did have a couple of questions specific to this budget, and if it's okay with you, I'll go through them pretty quickly. I have 4, and if it's okay, I'll just quick dialogue with Mr. McLeod, if that's all right.
Yes, you may proceed with dialogue, and we will note that your question has been noted by staff, and we'll look forward to a response that'll be made available to the full board relative to those questions. And at this point, please feel free to colloquy with Mr. McLeod relative to your 4 questions.
Thank you, sir. So the first is just a question about our carry forward policy. So I know a lot of governments or even just private organizations sort of have a use it or lose it expense policy, unless it was specifically or especially appropriated over multi-year cycles. And I understand we have a capital carry forward policy. But I heard you talk about both expense and capital, including like operating. And so I guess my clarifying question, is that a lump sum carry forward request? And is that also reflective of our fiscal policy? Does our fiscal policy consider, like capital expenditures, operating and the like? Because like, as you've noted, operating expenses could be things like salaries and incidentals. And so it just jumped out at me when you talked about the 145 million in rail reconstruction funding and expense carry forward. So is that something you could speak to in the budget, and also what our current fiscal policy states? Thank you.
Mr. McLeod.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Director Ruscia. Thank you also for meeting with myself, Todd Nickel, and Luke Cripps the other day. Really appreciated the dialogue on that. Great question regarding the carry forward policy. So within the 2024 and 2025 board approved fiscal policies, it refers, I believe, specifically to capital carry forwards, not expense carry forward. And that policy sets the limit at 3 years. There's 2 reasons for that. One being that many of the infrastructure projects or capital projects that we have can take up to 3 years to carry forward. So if there's no activity within a project that was approved in year 1, by the end of year 3, if there's still no recent activity within that period, it needs to be rebudgeted from start as a new capital item. The reason being, we want to allow enough time to be able to carry forward that amount to complete projects. But after 3 years, if nothing's been done, it also becomes stale in terms of the pricing and going out to bid, et cetera. So we want to go through the whole procurement process and come up with a revised scope if any changes need to be made, scope of work, as well as a new internal cost estimate of what that cost is, because surely the cost has changed over 3 years. That's the reasoning for that policy, and it's certainly up to the board's purview to make any changes to how often we carry those over. Regarding expenses, those are generally spent within a year, and most of the expenses, so the non-capital operating expenses that we carry over, happen to be, in my earlier example, we enter into a contract in November and it's a 6-month project. So they're all within 1 year, but they happen to overlap fiscal years. So we're asking to carry that forward. And so there's not necessarily a need to limit those. And because we almost zero-base budget from each year forward, we look at each line item, working with each department to develop that budget. And it would include those line items like same question. Why isn't there any activity on this budgeted line item for this specific expense project? Make a determination based on that. Should we carry it forward because it's going to be started at the end of the fiscal year, needs to be carried into the next, or just have that conversation. Maybe it's no longer needed and we just don't budget for that in the next year. So hopefully that answers that question.
Somewhat. I certainly understand the carry forward concept and what our fiscal policy is. And I know that depending on an organization's just definition, like, for example, if we had a capital improvement project, sometimes there are operational expenses that will eventually drop off. Or maybe if we hired a new staff person, that becomes, it's not something that needs to be scheduled over the course of 1 to 3 years. It becomes part of the regular budget. So I might just need to go back and look at the transcript. I had thought, and I could have misunderstood, that you were referencing like expense carry forward, not in terms of like replacing assets, which of course we're always going to depreciate, but I was thinking of like operational expense. So it's possible that I just misunderstood you, but I definitely get what you said relative to our fiscal policy. I'll take a look at the transcript. If I have any other questions, I'll just, follow up an email for speed. And yes, thank you for meeting with me and your team meeting with me. That was very helpful as we went through that. And it was just really generous of your time. So I do want to recognize that. And that kind of brings me into the next one, because I was going to say thank you for that extra table for paratransit and special services. And I think we have, just like per our memo back in the spring, a few additional services, or maybe they were IGAs that we previously labeled special services. And so we don't have to get into it tonight, but could staff just like check to make sure that those match? And if any are missing, we just include that, or just maybe a note to the board. Because I think, these additional services or benefits to the community, or these partnerships, it's a good story to tell, and it's not always reflected in this, in our budget book. And I consider our budget book to be, a very solid resource document, but it does show what we're spending our money on and the value we're bringing to community. So it's just a bit of a note there. And I couldn't find, please pardon me if it's in here and I just couldn't find it, but our private partnership dollars, as well as like grant dollars, for discount tickets, if they're being awarded in the next fiscal year, is that in our current budget book, or something that we could speak to or make sure that we share in our December meeting?
Mr. McLeod.
Thank you. Yes, it is. And we do not have that broken out separately. So yes, we can include that.
Okay, thank you. And again, I think it's a story that sometimes gets lost. And I want to, again, just say thanks for breaking out that table, with paratransit and special services. And before the chair cuts my mic, I know this might be an ops question, but I know paratransit is under bus operations. But is customer service for paratransit, which I do know that we outsource, is that under the same like division or department? And just I'm trying to unpack at page 64, which we have titled Organizational Structure by Department. Thank you for noting department. I'm sort of trying to track the story, and I realized when looking over this, I wasn't sure where which department or division is responsible for ADA customer service. And it might not be separated out, but if someone could answer, it would be helpful to know.
Mr. McLeod, and you've anticipated already some information here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the question. On packet page 65, it is included in the bus operations. And it is paratransit services are contracted out, including the customer service portion of that. And where you would see that is within this line item, purchase transportation. So in 2025, you can see most of these costs here are relatively small. The cost of the contracted services for paratransit is 49 million, with the rest, most of the rest of these costs being just the small staff that we have administering that program for RTD.
Okay, thank you, sir. And as you can imagine, per our conversation, I'm flipped right to, you know, page 65 in the budget book. So thank you again for that extra chart. I just wasn't sure as I was looking at it where we put customer service for paratransit and if it does fall under bus operations. So thank you for that clarification. And then finally, we have, I think, I didn't look at it page by page. I think we have the updated budget book that we're looking at right now on the website today. And I really appreciate that. And I was just wondering, not to be nitpicky, but just, I don't know if it's best practice or just to show that, you know, we have an update. This is an open-ended question. Maybe it's for the chair of the committee. You know, do we want to date that or show, you know, the previous version just to kind of show the community that there has been an update? Also, particularly for folks who might have been, you know, pulling this document off of that page of the website, it might just be helpful to have that history. And it also, I think, shows the enhancements that we're adding to the budget process. And so just a thought, doesn't necessarily need a response, but maybe for the good of the order. But thank you again, Mr. McLeod, for all your time and your patience and last week and during this meeting. I really appreciate everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Ruscia, and your time that you have spent on this is noted and appreciated. And I very much also echo the thanks to Mr. McLeod and to his staff for taking the time to meet with you and go through a host of questions, which is very helpful. Director Broom, I'm going to defer you for a moment because the board's first vice chair, Director Catlin, has raised her hand. So I'm going to go to her first. Director Catlin, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Forgive me, my voice is a little froggy. I just wanted to clarify, I noticed in the narrative that you talked about had the Tabor initiative not passed, any refunds would have been deferred to next year or the year after. So none of that would have been reflected in the budget. That being said, I know that for the sake of transparency, there might be some interest in showing any monies that were realized or reinstated as a result of that Tabor vote, just where they may be applied. And I'm told that some of that may be that we had interest-only payments on the Fast Tracks debt, and now we are able to free up money for principal payments on the Fast Tracks debt. But I just was kind of wondering where the breakdown of that was, because it seems like our budget's fungible, but just for the sake of notifying those people who entrusted us with those Tabor funds, if we could maybe estimate what some of that might be. Not saying in this budget, but maybe going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Catlin. And Mr. McLeod, you might want to weigh in on that, because part of me is thinking that the five-year fiscal forecast might be a place for some of that, but I leave it to you, Mr. McLeod.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, and thank you for the question. So yes, that was it was projected that 2027 would be the first year that refunds might occur based on that current information during the FIFE presentation. Given that, and we're talking about 2025, there was no provision put into this budget. However, we would have put it in had there been an estimated impact in 2025. So that doesn't need to be changed at this point. And I like your suggestion. I think maybe what we could do is we could update those numbers based on now that we have the new updated sales and use tax forecast. We'll be getting inflation numbers fairly soon. It would still be a forecast, of course, because we really won't know until the end of 2025 what our actual results were versus the actual in 2024. But it might be something worth tracking. It's just speculation at this point as to what that would be. But it might be good to do a look back in several months and kind of say, how are things developing? Did we dodge a bullet as an agency in terms of not being subject to Tabor?
Thank you very much, Mr. McLeod. Well said. Director Catlin, something further?
No, thank you. I was just trying to make a point that we might want to be transparent to those people that have entrusted us with preserving that Tabor money.
I think your message is well taken. Director Broom, we're back to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Several years ago, we had to make significant cuts in the organization because of COVID. In fact, we adopted an 85% service level. And tonight we heard that we're increasing bus service 25% in the 2025 budget. So does that mean that we've totally recovered from COVID and can now get on with our lives?
Director Broom always has an insightful way of framing issues for us. But Mr. McLeod, I will, since it was addressed to you, I'll give you the opportunity to weigh in on that, should you choose.
Thank you. And I would ask that perhaps General Manager Johnson weigh in on the operational aspects. What I can say regarding the budget is, in terms of the dollars, the way we budgeted for this was to work with the operations teams under Fred Worthen and Dave on the rail side, Dave Jensen, to develop a budget based on what projected system optimization plan dollars would be needed to meet those system optimization plans. Regarding looking back to the prior pre-COVID, I think there's been so many changes within the operational aspects and travel patterns that it may not be an apples to apples comparison, but welcome any additional staff input from an operational perspective regarding that question. If anybody has anything to add, thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am, you are recognized.
Thank you very kindly. And I know several board members weren't privy to a discussion in which we had during the performance committee, but there's a myriad of different factors to take into consideration. You heard from Mr. Worthen earlier as we talk about service planning and what we're trying to do from an intentional vantage point, looking at 18 months as opposed to doing service changes on an ad hoc basis for every 4 months or 3 times a year. What we're trying to do is discern the path forward and utilizing our comprehensive operation analysis as the framework in which to make those decisions. More specifically to your question, when you talked about whether or not are we back to what life was prior to COVID, we won't be, recognizing that the service patterns have been adjusted due to remote working. And what we're trying to do is actually leverage a COA going forward in 2025, whereby we can use current data to make informed decisions, not looking at what's happening in 2019, recognizing that the central business district here within Denver does not have the same level of occupancy and things of the like moving forward. So while we're looking at providing additional services, what we're doing in that vein is looking at travel patterns, demand, and going forward to ensure that we have adequate staffing, we have adequate extra board and things of the like. So from an operational vantage point, I would not necessarily say we're going to get back to where we were in COVID. That was nearly 6 years ago. But what we're doing is ensuring that we can have a framework, a transportation network that meets the needs of where we are today.
Well, thank you very much. I think staff did a really nice job of putting this year's budget together. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your comments.
Thank you very much, Madam General Manager, CEO, for weighing in on that. We appreciate it. And Interestingly, the concept reminds me of a favorite word of our friend Bruce Abel when he kept talking about right sizing. So there's some right sizing that goes on too. Are there any other directors, members of the committee, or otherwise with comments? Mr. Chair, Board Chair
Thank you.
Davidson is recognized.
Thank you very much, Committee Chair Tisdale. Thank you, Mr. McLeod. And thank you to the whole team for an excellent budget book. I concur with all the comments that have been made so far. It's an excellent document this year. I had two questions. They're both in areas that Mr. McLeod, you did touch on, but I just wanted to confirm and drill into a little bit. So the first has to do with the revenue assumptions, which have been stated as conservative. But I know I do see that we're using the September 2024 CU leads forecast, which is about 2.9% down from the March 2024 forecast, which is good. But as we've noted, throughout the year, we've been trending significantly below budget on sales and use tax in 2024. We've been okay in terms of our net cash outflow because of the lower expenses in 2024. But just in looking at 2025, if we did continue the below baseline, that below the mid forecast that's been presented by CU Leads, I know we certainly can withstand that. But do you foresee that we would increase the negative cash outflow, in effect, be drawing down reserves more? Or is there some slack that's built in somewhat to expenses where we could adapt, which has been somewhat the case in 2024? So just looking for, if that trend line does continue down, what we anticipate our reaction to be.
Thank you very much. And Mr. McLeod, you may respond.
Thank you. Our reaction would be exactly as you say, to track that. We do have some cushion before we would want to dip into reserves. I think we've done a good job as an agency under General Manager Johnson's leadership and the board's direction in terms of improving our financial position to where we now finally have some solid reserves. And it would be my opinion that we probably don't want to dip into those unless we really have to. So we have the ability on the expense side and the expenditure side to make adjustments on the fly. So our intent would be to make adjustments. We probably start with certain discretionary spending that's included in the budget without causing any pain for the organization. If it was rather severe, obviously we'd want to come back to the board, have those discussions. We'll continue to provide monthly financial statements and provide information if it becomes a concern, certainly. And then if it became something more dramatic, we would definitely want to have that conversation in a setting such as this about some options that we could address. Typically in the past, and what I would recommend going forward is we first look at obviously discretionary spending and possibly delaying some spending in that respect until sales and use taxes recover. I think we're a long way off from that. It would take several months, but preferably we would do that before dipping into reserves. We also have some other levers we can pull. So for instance, right now, all of our capital expenditures are being cash funded with available cash. That has only been going on for about 4 years now, 4 or 5 years. In the past, what we've done is we've actually borrowed money to spread that cost over several years. It ends up costing the agency a little bit more in terms of expense, interest expense. Our interest rates are fairly low, about 2%, 2 to 3%. So not a huge hit to the organization, but there's certain things that we could do like that before we really want to dip into reserves or make any significant expense adjustments. So it depends on the severity of what we're looking at as to what measures we would recommend.
Thank you. And before you go on, Chair Davidson, I'm just thinking if our interest payments are like 2% and if inflation is basically 3%, we actually make money by borrowing. Chair Davidson, you had another question.
I did, sir. Thank you very much. And Mr. McLeod, thank you. Great answer. And thank you for the thorough answer and the diligence in approach. My final question is also on another area of potential conservatism and just wanted to make sure I understand it. So although it's only 5% or a relatively small portion of the revenue, the budgeted revenue, looking at our fair revenue, it was a notable variance from our budget to actual in 2024. The move from, I think it was 54.9 to 59.9 million on the fare revenue. While that was below budget, we still represented growth from fiscal year 2023, but 2025 is looking pretty, even further down at 57.2. So my question was just, is this a function of conservative planning given what we have learned, or are there substantial things that we're anticipating impacting or biasing down the fare revenue?
Mr. McLeod.
Thank you. Great question. And because the new fare structure was implemented at the beginning of 2024, that budget was based on projections from 2023. We also continued the Zero Fare for Youth program during 2024. I believe it was September 1st going forward. So in the budget, we had not necessarily contemplated that program continuing. We now have a $5 million grant to offset that lost revenue that will be spread over the next year and a half. So there's a little bit of shifting going on between the fare revenue line and the grant line. We think we're still being pretty conservative with our fare revenue estimates, but to your point, it did come in below what we had originally anticipated with this new fare, and I think with the new fare structure, and I think we have a better idea of how that's progressing going forward. And just as a reminder, in the 5-year financial forecast, we did not include in that or this budget any fare changes, increases. So it's really just trying to get a good handle on how is this developing in terms of our past programs and the usage of cash paying customers and our mobile ticketing, et cetera. So I think we got our feet under us a little bit better and have a better projection going forward for 2025.
Thank you very much. That concludes my questions, Mr. Chair. And Mr. McLeod, once again, just thank you for the great work here and thank you for those answers, sir.
Thank you very much, Board Chair Davidson. Appreciate it. Director Ruscia, you have one last bite at the apple.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't going to because sometimes I've been told I ask too many questions, but I guess if we're talking about $1 billion, it's okay to ask a few more questions. I don't want to poke a bear or a sore spot, but I just kind of, again, looking at this chart, we've talked about increasing services, but we're also talking about decreasing fare revenues, and you can see that year over year as projected. And I'm not sure if this is something we discussed in December, but I couldn't quite close that. I couldn't quite square that when I was looking at the budget. So of course, landed with the harder question, and I don't know if that's something staff could sort of address. I think Mr. McLeod was getting a little bit there, but I guess I'm just going to stop right there, and it's a kind of open-ended question / a comment, because those numbers are pretty significant, especially if and I know it was pre-COVID, look back 5, 6, 7, or 10 years ago in those trends. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Ruscia. And although I think that's something that could be responded to in greater detail later, I'll let Mr. McLeod proceed if he has any observations he wants to share now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. And really the way that the budget was put together was, yes, we added the additional revenue hours, the 100,000 revenue hours on the bus system. So yeah, that was there, but we did not contemplate from a conservative standpoint. Generally, I think what would happen is you add service, add frequency, and we didn't necessarily want to add additional revenue until we realized what that was. Recognizing that when you look at our cash flow statement, it looks like we're still at a break-even standpoint based on what the expenditure, except for $44 million. So, we could have assumed additional ridership and additional fare revenue, I suppose. It would have been relatively small just because the fare revenue only makes up 4% of our overall revenue. But from a conservative standpoint, we just projected based on kind of current sales what that might look like without making big assumptions about ridership coming back. Because I think typically what we see is when we add service, we might not see the ridership impact for a period of time, and we have the staggered service plans that go into effect. They don't all happen on January 1, of course.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. McLeod, and thank you, Director Ruscia, for concluding your questions with that so that we have something to chew on. Committee Vice Chair Guzman, you are recognized, sir.
Just really quickly, thank you so much for all of the work. Thank you for giving us something to look back to and look forward to using as we communicate with community about this. I think this is a very big step in the right direction for all of us on the board to be able to engage with community around discussions on budget. And I do appreciate the amount of detail that went into it. Also, I don't know if anybody else saw the news today, but I am really, really grateful that we are not looking at increasing our fares by 30%, as the board of SEPTA is considering doing in 2025. We are looking at keeping the fare the same and continuing zero fare for youth in this budget without increasing fares for everybody. And so I want to say that and highlight it. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. It's nice to point that out too, because there are a number of agencies that face a fiscal cliff and are taking steps such as that. And it's appropriate that from time to time we might beat our own drum. All right, are there any other questions or comments concerning the recommended action on the budget to approve the 3 resolutions that are in your packet? Having paused and not heard any, we are ready for a vote on the recommended action as moved by Vice Chair Guzman and seconded by Director Broom. Are there any no votes on this action? Having paused and allowed sufficient time for directors to unmute if they wanted to express a negative vote, the chair will declare that this recommended action passes unanimously with all 7 committee members voting in favor, no votes in opposition, and no opposition. That motion will proceed to the December 3rd board meeting. All right, you are familiar with the fact that we have CART as part of our service to our constituents, and having CART requires that we periodically take a break. So we are now going to take a 5-minute bio break, if nothing else, and we will finish up, and we don't have a lot more to do. We'll finish up our meeting in 5 minutes. So I have 7:23 p.m. We will reconvene at 7:28 p.m. The committee stands in recess. Thank you. All right, for the sake of the record, we may recommence the recording and we'll come back into session. Thank you very much for your patience as we dealt with our brief 5-minute recess there. We have concluded the third recommended action. The fourth and final recommended action this evening is for the salaried trustee appointment. This is a recommended action for the Board of Directors to approve resolution number blank series of 2024, reappointing Jenny Waskey, Senior Specialist Benefits, as a trustee with a term expiring December 31, 2026, and appointing Anthony Sabia, Director, Total Rewards, Vince Buzek, RTD Board Director, and Troy Whitmore, RTD Board Director, as trustees, with terms expiring December 31, 2026, to the Salaried Employee Defined Benefit Pension Plan, the DB plan, and Salaried Employee Defined Contribution Retirement Plan, the DC plan, trusts. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Director Geisinger. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you very much, Director Catlin. I like it that not everybody speaks at once. You take your time getting there. That's good. That's very polite. I would like to ask Marathon Man Doug McLeod, our Chief Financial Officer, to present this item to us. Mr. McLeod, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Tisdale. And as you described, we're just looking to get Finance and Planning Committee approval and followed by board approval to replace or extend expiring terms on these two trusts over the retirement plans for salaried or non-represented employees. The only thing I'd like to add is I want to thank Director Deschel and Director Broom for their service on these trusts, very helpful, as well as Bill Weidenauer, who's the engineering manager in bus operations, much appreciated, and look forward to having some new members on the board. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. At this time, any directors who have questions or comments regarding this recommended action, please raise your virtual hand and you will be recognized in order. Seeing none, I echo the words of thanks that have been expressed by our Chief Financial Officer for the service provided by our departing directors, and we thank you very much for that. Having now allowed opportunity for discussion, but having none, let me call for the vote and ask, are there any no votes on this action? Having paused and allowed sufficient time for directors to unmute and indicate a negative vote if they had one, and hearing none, the chair will declare that we have 7 votes in favor of the recommended action, no votes opposed, and no abstentions. So the motion as made by Director Geisinger and seconded by Director Catlin passes unanimously. Our next agenda item relates to discussion items. There are no discussion items that we have scheduled on this evening's agenda, and therefore we turn to other matters. Before I open up to the committee for broader discussion on other matters, I will exercise the chair's prerogative and raise some additional awareness around the results and recognizing the forthcoming impacts to RTD of several ballot measures that were decided during last week's election. First, the 2024 RTD election impact. And I preface these comments with the fact that they are based on unofficial election results published by the appropriate county clerks as well as the Colorado Secretary of State, but updated and validated as of this morning. RTD referred Measure 7A, which asked voters to exempt all revenue RTD receives from the scope of Tabor, has received over 71% in favor. I say again, over 71% of the electorate voted in favor of debrucing RTD. This means that henceforth, all RTD revenues will no longer be subject to the Tabor state constitutional provisions. It cannot be overstated what a profound long-term impact this will have on the agency. While 7A does not provide us with any new revenue, it does protect the RTD against the prospect of significant revenue shortfalls that would be triggered by Tabor in the event of a major economic shock. I'd like to point out that at least in some ways, this ballot issue was a chance for voters across our district to provide direct feedback to us on how they see RTD performing. Clearly, at 71% in support of this ballot measure, many of our voters have expressed confidence in RTD. I'll further point out that of the 8 counties that are contained within the Regional Transportation District, not one of them has supported us at less than 61% in support for this measure. Some of the counties were 79, 80%. This shows that RTD continues to enjoy the support of the people who live in one of the nation's largest transit districts. RTD also referred to the ballot measure 7B. Now, this ballot measure asked certain voters who reside in the town of Erie whether they wished to be annexed into the RTD and be subject to RTD sales and use tax on all goods and services that are sold in their geography. This measure has passed. It will bring RTD, it will bring into RTD the entirety of the town of Erie. You see, currently there are portions of the town that are not in the Regional Transportation District. Our service planners and other key staff have already been coordinating with officials of the town of Erie on service to the additional areas in Erie that will now be included in the district. As of this morning, the Secretary of State reports 948 votes in favor with 889 opposed. That's almost 52% in favor. And then finally, a measure that this board actually took official action to support, Denver ballot question 6A, concerning the Denver Downtown Development Authority. That measure has passed with over 77% of the voters supporting that measure. This measure allows the DDDA, the Denver Downtown Development Authority, to issue up to $847 million in debt to support the redevelopment of downtown Denver. I currently chair the DDDA board and have been fortunate to serve on the DDDA since 2018. I hope that RTD, and specifically someone on this board, continues to retain and cultivate this connection to the DDDA. In many ways, the well-being of RTD is inextricably linked to the vibrancy of Denver's downtown. the Central Business District. We must remain involved with the work of the DDDA. All right, before closing out the meeting, are there any other matters that any director wishes to bring forward? Director Ruscia, you are recognized.
Thank you, sir. I might eat the whole orchard on this one. This is definitely director's privilege, but I thought perhaps I could volunteer GM CEO Johnson or perhaps board chair Davidson in singing for He's a Jolly Good Fellow. I saw Miss Johnson's face snap to attention as soon as I said that. I won't actually ask, but I know we save this stuff for the January meeting. This meeting feels a little bittersweet, and I know we have more business to do. But I just wanted to say while we're here, I'm going to miss you being chair of this committee. I learned a lot from you, and I thank you very much. As Mr. Bamber ended his comments, so moved. I think that was a nod to you, Mr. Chair, because RTD isn't the same without your booming voice. And again, I know we save this stuff for January, but this being our last F&P of the year, thank you for entertaining me. Just wanted to say thank you. You bring something special to the board and to this particular committee, and it will be greatly missed. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Director Ruscia. I am moved and honored by your words. Board Chair Davidson, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Committee Chair Tisdale. I'll just pile right on there, although I'm not very confident in my singing voice. I'll just say I raised my hand to say a very heartfelt thank you to you, Committee Chair Tisdale, for shepherding and leading this committee in the first year of committee work plans, staying, as always, very disciplined and diligent in those work plans and in leading the committee through another successful year of work on finance and planning. So thank you very much for that leadership. And likewise, the vice chair of this committee, Director Guzman, thank you very much for your leadership as well in the committee and leaning in and engaging as a leader this year on the committee. So I thank both of you for that. And once again, General Manager and CEO Johnson and our Chief Financial Officer, Doug McLeod, and their teams for collaborating and working with the two of you as well in this committee. So thank you very much. And since I won't be here at the January meeting, I definitely am happy to say thank you and farewell. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Board Chair, and we appreciate your words also. Board First Vice Chair Catlin, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo those thanks as well, and this committee has been well served by both the chair and the vice chair, and I think that a lot of really good work has been done. This is completely off track, but the performance committee has met, and we have quite a bit of work to do until the end of the year. So there will be a couple more meetings scheduled, and we are encouraging all directors to attend if possible as we proceed with the business of that committee. Some of the topics of which were brought up tonight. So just stay tuned, and I know Mr. Kroll will be putting out some scheduling and agendas, but I really would ask that you all participate. There will be one special board meeting, excuse me, and that will be on the 18th, but that will be at the scheduled time of 5:30 as opposed to our normal schedule for the performance committee of 8:30 on Monday morning. So thank you. I just wanted to encourage directors to attend if possible.
Thank you very much. That's a very important committee, obviously, and the work which involves all of the board directors. It's important that we have those brought to our attention and that we all serve reminded well by that. Director Broom, you are recognized.
Yeah, I hadn't heard anybody mention them yet, but I think we owe a lot to our legal department. We had some really big lawsuits against RTD that we came out on top of by hanging in there. So, and that hanging in there was, of course, our legal office. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's I always like hearing lawyers being applauded for something. It's a rare event, so thank you. And I think you're right. Our general counsel and all of her staff have served us well. We appreciate that. Mr. Vice Chair, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, sir. You know, they tell you not to learn how the sausage is made. And being a leader of a committee teaches you how the sausage is made to get to the board. So thank you for the opportunity to work with you and learn with you and apprentice under you. Your leadership style is amazing. And I promised you at the beginning of the year, I wouldn't be an easy vice chair to get along with. I think we worked that out pretty well, but it's good to have somebody to challenge thought process and really plan thoughtfully through meetings. That said, if you don't mind, I will turn to the staff, CEO Johnson, CFO McLeod, all of the members of our wonderful staff who have gotten us through this year and through our work plans. It's not been an easy year by any stretch of the imagination. But we did it, and I am thankful to you for your steadfastness and your guidance, for pushing both Chair Tisdale and I to get this done. But really, Chair Tisdale, I cannot make my voice boom in the same way that you do, but I love you for it, and I wanted to say thank you profoundly for everything that you have done to shepherd this committee along. And so I know that I am able to say this confidently on behalf of all of my colleagues that are not here. Thank you, because I think we have done the work and brought it to the board, and we have not missed a beat with any of our work plans. And that is a remarkable feather to stick in your cap. So I appreciate you. Also, did you vote yes on that last initiative for DDDA? I
Yes,
just want to make sure you said that.
I believe I even posted it on social media.
All right, well, we've got some big shoes to fill. I think we've got to deal with APTA, DDDA, and I don't even know the other number of things that you do, as well as chairing this committee so well. So thank you for all of your hard work. It is much appreciated, and you will be missed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. And you promised me that you wouldn't be an easy vice chair. I think you lied to me. You were a very easy vice chair. You worked exceptionally collaboratively. Any other thoughts before I have a few closing comments? All right, well, finally, as has been noted, this is the last Finance and Planning Committee for 2024. And as we face having I said seven new board members joining the RTD board as of January 7th, I do have a few words I'd like to share with you all now. I'm now coming to the end of 8 years on this board. I've been honored to be twice elected as the chair of this board. I had the thrill of either attending or actually cutting the ribbons for the A line, the B line, the G line, the Southeast Rail Extension, the Civic Center Station. And while I was mayor of Cherry Hills Village, I attended the ribbon cutting for the W line. That's this poster that you see back here that you've wondered about through the years. What the hell? Throughout my years on the RTD board, I have encouraged all of us to communicate, collaborate, cooperate. Never has it been more important for this board to do that with each other, with our general manager, CEO, and with all our employees and customers. You must communicate, sharing information, problems, concerns, solutions. You must collaborate. The collaboration that you do is the driver. It's the engine of RTD's success, of RTD's advancement. And then ultimately, you must turn that collaboration into cooperation, actually doing something positive. So I ask you all, please, to take forward this torch that we call RTD and carry it into the future. Do not let it be quenched. I leave it in your hands, confident that it is in good hands, that it will not be extinguished, and that it will continue to burn bright and will grow. And years from now, when you speak of our time together, and you will. Be kind. Thank you. The next Finance and Planning Committee meeting is scheduled for some date to be determined in January, at which time the committee will hold elections for chair and vice chair, as well as discuss its work plan for the coming year. And seeing no other discussion, the meeting of the RTD Finance and Planning Committee for Tuesday, November 12, 2024 is adjourned at 7:48 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Thank you all and have a great night.